Hello, welcome to the July 18th, 2025 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the live stream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can ask questions in the live chat field, or you could just simply send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, if you could specify which version of Cubase you're using. So if it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, which version number, so if it's version 12, 13, or 14, and which operating system, so if it's Windows or Mac OS, that information is helpful. We should have an index of all of the topics that are covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream ends. If you want to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, that we have covered over 40,000 different topics. You could go to cubaseindex.com, and we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating a wonderful site. We also want to give special thanks to our two moderators, Jazz Dude and Agent K. So they're not Steinberg employees. They just kind of make it a better community experience. So we give special thanks to them. We'll also express our gratitude to Jazz Dude for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord, which is a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America. I primarily focus on Steinberg products, and I'm the host today. I'm presenting from just outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. And if you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And with that, we will go ahead and begin. All right, so we see Pastoral Apologetics is checking in from Salzburg, Austria. He says he's having a trip of a lifetime, but not missing Club Cubase meetings and hanging out with the master of all things Cubase. We hope it's great to hear. I've always wanted to go to Austria. It's on my bucket list. I haven't made it over there yet, but we hope you're enjoying it. And thanks for your loyalty. All right, so we see Stefan from Sweden. All right, and we see Captain Energy Music checking in from outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. He's wishing everyone well and hoping everyone's making great music. All right, so we see Dwight Cunningham. Great to see you back. Says, hello, Greg DC, checking in from Bahamas. Greg, I took a deeper dive into the sampler track and found out that samples can be transferred to Groove Agent or Pad Shop. Amazing. Yep. So if you're not familiar with that functionality, let's say I want to just take a particular sample here. We'll open up my sampler control in the bottom. So let's say I just drag and drop a sample in here. We'll see these three little arrows. So if we wanted to, we could transfer this to Groove Agent SE, to Hallian, directly into Pad Shop or Backbone. So if I wanted to just start off with something and say, oh, I need to do more work with it. I want to do like more work in Groove Agent. I could just click right here, transfer it to Groove Agent, and now my sample has automatically been just carried over directly into Groove Agent or some of the other samples. So again, to do that, we could just again come right over here, and we see these three little arrows that point up to the right. So now we can take the work that we've done in the sampler track. If we need to do more stuff that's kind of more tied to particular instruments, we have the option of taking the sampler track and migrating it all directly into one of the other instruments. All right, we see Tim K joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. His cat Buddy is napping, but he's going to offer a paw wave anyway to all the other pets that are nearby. All right, great to see Jason Sykes. Says, hi, Greg and Cubase Nation. Question, can I use the new modulators to control external synths? Would like to map them to MIDI CC and get extra LFOs, for example. Thanks very much. So currently it's designed for the internal VST3 instruments. Some of the times the data that's being generated by the modulators is often too much data for particular instruments to reliably respond to. So sometimes when we're dealing with traditional MIDI communication with kind of the speed of MIDI transmissions, it could be a little too much information. So currently it is only for the internal VST3 plugins. All right, and we see Jan from Stockholm is Cubase Index Jan, just saying happy Friday to everyone on the meeting. Always wonderful to see Jazz Dude. We appreciate everything he does. We have Roland Stuff checking in from Sussex, England, saying greetings to everyone. Artist known as Love is wishing everyone's doing great. He wants everyone to hit the thumbs up button. You see Jazz Dude posted a deep dive into Cubase pattern editor tutorial link. We have Tony Trunzo checking in from Australia. Thanks for joining us so very early in the morning. All right, we have Alexander just saying, I believe it's Alexander saying hello, Greg and everyone. Thanks for joining us today. All right, and Alexander's question is, can you explain, please, all three warp algorithms? I mean, the difference between musical events, follow, and warp, also follow free warp. Okay. So let me just... So let's come over to, let's just do a new project. Okay, so the first mode that we're going to have is, and when we have the warp tool, there's three different warp modes on it. So let's say first thing I want to do is come over and we'll do our warp grid. Now the warp grid is really intended so that we can kind of do almost manual tempo mapping. So let's say if I come here, so we could say, okay, this is where bar 1 is. So if we just kind of count. So we could say, and when we have our free warp tool enabled, we could just basically move the timeline. So we say this is where measure 3 starts. This is where measure 4 is. So we could just kind of come over here and say, okay, this is where measure 4 beat 2 is, or measure 4 beat 3. So we could kind of manually map out to our grid as we do this. So basically what we're doing is just taking, and let's say I'll take my loop off. So that's what the kind of traditional free warp. Now let's say if we have an event in musical mode, so this, the timing of the event doesn't change, but the timing, we move the measures to actually fit the timing here. Now if we do this with kind of a warp, let's say an event that's in musical mode, let me just drop a loop in here. Just okay. So let's say we have this drum loop here. All right, so now I think if we put this into warp grid musical events follow, that what we could do is as we change the tempo, that we could see the musical event, the parts that are in musical mode will change. We notice that when we do this, this event isn't in musical mode, so the audio doesn't get shifted. But now as I adjust the tempos, this is just simply stretching. So if it's in musical mode, it will stretch. If it's not in musical mode, then the events don't stretch. But again, once it's in musical mode and we adjust the measures, we could see how that is automatically going. So as we move the tempo, the events will kind of stretch to fit within the tempo if it is set in musical mode. The third mode we have is called free warp. And what free warp is going to allow us to do is we could place warp markers just by kind of clicking. And generally you want to have like roughly a marker before and after. And what this will allow me to do, and this is great for kind of fixing rhythmic corrections. So let's say like this note was early or late right here. So what I could do now is just come over here, and we notice that as I kind of approach it on the right hand side, that this warp marker will turn white. And now what I could do is just simply move the events here, and that will stretch just an event. So it's not contingent. It doesn't really follow the tempo. It's independent of the tempo, has no relation to the tempo when we're in free warp. So with warp grid, as I move the events, as I change the tempo, the events will change. And if I want it to just be in standard warp grid, so that's warp grid with musical events, and then standard warp grid, when I move, these events will just kind of automatically, we're just moving the time itself. So if I come over here, we could just move the time without affecting the other elements. So let me know if that's helpful for you. And thanks for joining us, Alexander. All right, so we see Fly V just saying hi to Jazz Dude and Cubase Nation and myself. We see Dallas LaRue checking in from Las Vegas. Thanks for joining us. All right, so we have Recyclop who's signing in from Finland, going out for a walk, but he'll be back later on. I think Uno Memento might be on a cruise, so we'll see if Pertti Komenin joins also from Finland. All right, SE Tracks asks, hello, Greg. Should my vocal bus be in stereo or mono when recording vocals? If I route vocals to a bus, then why can't I pan my vocals? I see that my pan is grayed out. Help me. All right, so if we have a vocal file here, let me just drop some in, or I could just go to a different project. All right, so if we're taking, let's say we have our vocal file here, so, and let me just set my output bus here. All right, so we have a vocal file. I'll just do it on one that's not sample based. But generally, I would always have the vocals, unless you're recording like two different microphones. Generally, it will make sense to have like your vocals function as mono tracks. So, and mono tracks routed to stereo groups. So let's say if I'm playing this here. All right, so if we now come over, so let's say we look at this, we have our, now if I route this to a new group, so I'm going to say let's route this to a, and I'll switch to my mix console here. All right, so we have, since this destination is going currently to our stereo output, I could pan. Now if I route this to a group track, and let's make that a mono group. So as we come over here, All right, so there's no, there's no panning here because it's being routed to the mono group. So when I come to my group, since that group is being sent to the stereo out, then I could pan. So generally, most people, if they're going to be doing groups, unless they're specifically going for a mono type of thing, which is a very viable thing, like I remember, lots of people will do like specific mono effects intentionally, whether it's just going to be mono in the center and they don't want everything kind of wide stereo panning, then you could choose to do mono. But it really depends on the source of what the panning is. So if it's going into a mono source, the source is being fed out to the stereo out, and in this case, the group, our mono group, would automatically have the panning. So if we send this track, let's undo that and send it to a stereo group. So we're going to take our vocal and we'll say add track, and let's add a group channel to the selected track, and I'm going to send it to a stereo. I can still have my panning on the track and on the group as well. So, so if you're not routing it to a destination that can be panned, there's no panner. So let me know if that makes sense for you. All right, we have Michael Marshall checking in from Somerset, UK. Thanks for joining us. All right, we have VS Terra Nova checking in from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Thanks for joining us on the live stream, being a part of the community. All right, we have Balsa checking in, joining us from Montenegro. John Costigan joining from Kenosha, Wisconsin. All right, we see Jan from Cubase Index giving Jazz Dude kudos for his super fantastic unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. Okay, so we have Manfig says, hi Greg and Cubasers. Manny here from Santa Barbara, California. Beautiful day here in Santa Barbara, enjoying the day and making music. Thank you, Greg, for all your awesome help in Cubase 14. So Santa Barbara is not a bad place to be. It's always beautiful there. All right. See, Jason Sykes just says, thank you. All right, Bratman Studio says, hey Greg, Friday, since I'm retired, every day is the same. Fun with Cubase. All right. All right, so we see Vicken Ishkanian says, any chance modular effect routing and inserts coming soon to Cubase? So let me know what exactly you mean by modular effect routing. So because generally inserts will, when you look at inserts here, the inserts, how traditional recording paradigms will be set to, will be serial, but if you wanted to get more complex with routing, you could use sends and then kind of change orders. But let me know exactly what you mean by modular effects with the inserts. What you mean by the modular effect routing. Giving an example, you might be able to duplicate it. We see Rick France checking in from Pacific Northwest. Rob Schmedeke from Tarpon Springs, Florida joining. We see Soren from Sweden. All right, and we have Professor Dr. Ayman Ayesh joining from Jordan. RFBs. All right, and we have Uno Memento joining from Finland. All right, Balsa's question is, are clip gain automation on an audio track event included in its VeryAudio Melodyne signal? So yeah, that will come. So let's say if we are doing, let's just get to a different project here. All right, so let's say if we're kind of playing this project. So I want to just come over here and let's just do quick clip gain on this. I want to take all right, so now we'll listen to this and it'll get softer. All right, so now when we go into VeryAudio, so we'll just come over here. So we don't necessarily, I don't think we'll see the amplitude changes, but the audible result will be the same. So now we listen to it. So we could just kind of see the clip gain changes there, kind of get louder and softer. So you hear it, but you may not see it reflected in the waveforms because it's actually using the waveform there. But if we rendered the changes, we could have those amplitude changes automatically. So we come here, could be accommodated. So yeah, but the clip gain changes, that's kind of before it does all the processing. So that way we could, all those can be accommodated for when you're doing ARA editing or tuning. All right, RFB just says how to colorize your track in Save It. Use Cubase 14 Pro latest version. So, so one of the things that can confuse people when colorizing tracks is tracks or events can be colorized. So if an event is selected, that will take priority. So let's say if I have this event selected and I want to change the track color, let's say to this color. So we'll come here. The event gets the color and not the track because the event was selected. So if I select the track with no events selected, I can now come over to the colors and change the colors for the particular event. So we could just say, okay, or for the track. So we'll just say, okay, let's make this track, and we could just kind of change the colors and we can see the track and that. And then when you save that particular project, those colors will be recalled for you. So let me know if that makes sense for you, Arif. All right, so we have Serhad saying hi from Turkey. Thanks for joining. My mom's favorite country that she's visited. All right, Tony Trunzo asks, Greg, under the file menu, what is new library and how would you use it? Thanks. All right, so let's say I was doing like a corporate project. So we'll just switch this to new project. Okay, and we'll come over All right. And like, let's say I need to have maybe almost like, the corporate, the corporate audio sample, thinking dun 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 dun. We have if we're ABC in America, or different, like if we have, different types of little audio samples. So and let's say I just have a number of samples in my project, and these are all like, and we see this a lot where it might be like people doing ad work, and they may have like on ABC, see this, and they may have another audio file that says, next week, watch this show, and in 3 days, in 4 days, in 2 days, tomorrow, tonight. And they have all these different files that they just need to have access to. Or let's say if we are a composer, and many times composers may start off their whole project doing sound design, where they're coming up with different sounds that are kind of unique to that particular project. And then if they get a sequel, if they're lucky enough to get a sequel, they may have to find and reference some of those sounds, like for a character. So let's say I'm here and I have this project. So I'm going to come over here and just say new library. Okay, so I'll put this on my desktop. Let's say new folder here. All right. Okay, so I think, let's say if I come here, let me go into the pool. So we go to the pool. I've done this a while. And then from the pool menu, we could say export pool. So, and this is a .npl file. So we'll come over here. Let's get to the desktop, and we'll say, put it into our libraries. And we'll call this July 18th library. Okay. So now let's say I'm doing a completely new project, and we have a number of files. All right, and now I know that I need to, like, I'm working on this commercial, but I need to get the corporate tag sound or a character sound. So when we do this, if I go to my pool window, we could just say, okay, here's all these audio files. But we could think of a library as basically just coming over here, and let's open a library as being a pool that's not associated with a particular project. So we'll come over here, and now I could just open up this particular library, and now that library can be completely independent. So at this point, now you can see these are the files that we have here, and these are the files from our library. So library could be a collection of often used sounds. So many film composers I know will take all of their sound design and save it as a library in case they need to transport it or recall it later. So it's a collection of different sounds. It's basically a pool that's independent of the project. And now we could just come over here and say, oh, I need this library file for, watch on tomorrow night, next week, on the next episode. So all these different little tags, instead of having to record them all over again, you could just simply have those as different library files so that you could recall a collection of different sounds. All right, so we see Brian Sawyer checking in from Yuma, Arizona. Hope you're getting settled in with your wife. All right, so we see in the sampler track, is it possible to replace the audio but keep the slice lines / positions I chopped a sample, but later I found a better quality of that sample that I want to replace now? So I don't think so, because it might do it like on the actual file itself. So, but let's give it a try. These are all MIDI, so let me just... All right, so I'm going to just take this file, let's drag it over here. I'm going to copy it, or I'll just, we'll make it a different file name. I'll just kind of render this in place. Okay, so let's say if we drag this into sampler track, okay, and let's slice. All right, and we'll just add some additional slices here. Okay, so let's see if we lock this. Okay, so let me just slice it one more time here. All right, I'm just going to put like a whole bunch of slices here. Okay, so that's this file. Now I'm going to replace it with this file. Yeah, so it's not going to do that because it's actually kind of figuring out the slices on the file by file basis. So, you know, it could be the same, like audibly, but it does it kind of based on the file name, it looks like. So I think you're going to have to redo the slices because it's going to be stored within the actual file itself. See, Tim K just says that comment about retirement and days of the week. I heard a quote once from a Safari guide: in the bush, every day is Tuesday. Yeah. My neighbor who retired a couple years ago just says every day is a Saturday. So I hope he likes his Saturdays. All right, so we see, hi Greg, to continue from the last stream, I was trying to get a shuffle with quantizing a little for feel, just like Steely Dan's Pretzel Logic drum. I think you could try for kind of a 6/8 type of a feel. One of the things you could do is probably just actually put the Steely Dan track in, and you know, and this is always, so let's say I have, let's listen to see if this is appropriate. Let's just see, we'll find something a little more swing. So if I was going for a particular feel, so let's say if I'm here and let's just take like we'll add a drum machine to this. So let me just, so let's say we'll just do a total generic pattern here. Okay, so let's get to the editor. All right, so let's say we have just kind of sorry, I grabbed the right one. All right, so if I drag this out, let's say to a part here, and I want to just convert this to MIDI. So I could just take kind of the pattern here, and this is always a cool thing to do. So let's go to the pattern, and let's go to our hit points, and we could figure out kind of, where our hit points are, and then save it as a groove. So now when I come over here, so we'll play this pattern here, I could now just apply this groove quantize. So just say, okay, we're going to take this and we'll apply the quantize. Let me just mute that. So we have this kind of playing very straight. So now I kind of just threw the hit points, and now so try just loading, like if you like the groove of a song, load it up, do kind of the hit points under create. You can just say create a groove. It's going to show up as a preset in your quantize, and then you could quantize just that particular groove. So let's say we would go from, so kind of where we were, if we undo. And if we want to play those two together. So just, if you like the feel of a song, load it in, figure out the hit points, create a groove quantize preset, and then quantize your MIDI to that. So, but you could also, very easily, if you want to put, let's say, if we come here, let's undo that swing, like this is very straight. If we come over here to kind of our quantize panel, so let's say, okay, I want this to be 16th notes, and we adjust the swing. So try like 60%, 80%, somewhere around in there. So you could, and we could see visually what's going on with the sound, so you could adjust the swing there. So let me know if that's something that seems to make sense for you, Rick. All right, so we see from Gulf Coast, Florida man says, hello, does anyone have a template for Machine Mark III Micro? So are you looking for like a remote control template, or, so let us know if it's a MIDI remote, but you could probably just do a search in the Steinberg forums. There's kind of a list, an area where people upload different MIDI remote controllers. All right, so you see Vicken Ishkanian just says, I'm from Chicago area, so thanks for joining us. We have Tiago joining, sending greetings from Brazil, is on earlier than usual. Great to have you on. All right, we see from Vince, Fly V from Winnipeg. It's Dad's birthday today. We know you spend a lot of time with your parents, which is great and wonderful. Wish your dad a happy birthday from all of us in the live stream. Hope you get to celebrate with him. All right, we have Luis Palomino sending cheers from Peru. Thanks for being online with us again. Great to see you back. All right, and we see from Vicken, sorry, missed this. Hi, Greg. Regarding modular, for example, setting the left channel to a flanger and the right channel to a mono delay, then mix them back on a track level without using groups. All right, so let's say if I want to do that here, so I want a delay on the left channel and the right channel, or flanger on the left. So if I come over here, so one thing that a lot of people don't know is, let's say if we come to, let's load up our flanger, and let's say delay. So we'll just say, and then if we go on the channel itself, so, and then mix them back on the track level without using groups. Okay, so let's say, all right, so we have this track playing, so we'll just, all right, so when we open up the channel settings, we could go to the routing, and then we could just choose to make this mono. And then when we come over, we could go to our routing editor. So say, okay, we want the left channel to pass. And we'll come over here. Let's say we go to our inserts. Let's make this our delay mono as well. So now we have the delay on the, so not using groups, but if we come over here, so now the flanger is on the right and the delay, or flanger is on the left and the delay is on the right channel. So let's say, so you don't have to send it to a group or combine them. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to accomplish. So now we can hear the delay only in the right speaker. We'll put it to maybe so let me know if that's kind of what you want to accomplish. So you don't have to send it to a group, you know, and it's kind of all combined together. And thanks for joining us, Vicken. Used to go to Chicago a lot. It used to be my territory back in the day. All right, wonderful to see Sable Winters on from Bay Area, California. All right, Adolfo Moreno just says, hello, I'm Mexican living in Italy in the last version of Cubase 14 Pro, and want to know if it's possible to throw an audio file and to know which notes are played, like an analyzer or something. So it's not going to break apart. There's kind of two different methods of doing this, but if it's a, let's open up a project here to show.
first met.
All right.
That was a long, long time ago. It was 7th grade in the school parking lot.
All right, so let's say if I want to, for a monophonic source, what we could do, like let's say our vocal here is, we have the option to just go into VeryAudio. So we could do kind of individual notes from a monophonic source, meaning a single note that's being played, not chords. But if we want to come over here, we could go into our VeryAudio editor. And at this point, we'll see under functions that we could extract MIDI. So we could put it onto a new track. So as we...
Waiting on our...
So if we come over here and we'll listen to just...
It caught my breath while you called me.
So now we could...
Long, long time ago.
So we could see kind of MIDI for an individual part. Now, if it has chords, we're not able to kind of break it down. But one of the things that we can do with chords is just simply, if you want to know kind of what notes, or like, like let's say this guitar part here, well, you can't break down the individual notes.
Waiting on our yellow coach to fit.
What I could do is just drag this to a chord track, and that will break apart all the chords for us. So while it's not, breaking apart the the individual notes within the audio file, I think Melodyne does it. Whether it does a great quality when it's editing it could be, you can judge for yourself. I think it's always very audible. But individual single voice instruments we could do, like chords. We can figure, like something that's playing multiple voices, we can break down the chords, whether it's audio or MIDI, but not the individual notes into MIDI. And Adolfo, thanks for joining us. All right, Tony Trunzo asks, Greg, on the right zone under media, I can preview audio samples, but not MIDI samples. Is there a way to preview MIDI samples? Thank you. So generally, MIDI files don't have a particular sound. Now, there's something called MIDI loops. So if we wanted to come over here, so let's go to loops and samples. And if I go to SQL, for instance, a MIDI loop will actually have a particular instrument that's associated with it, so that when we click on it, that we could preview. So let's say if I want to come over here. So a MIDI loop, what it adds in a MIDI file is just going to be like the notes and not any assignment. But a MIDI loop, we can come over and just, load up the particular instrument and preview that. All right, now if it's going to be a straight MIDI file, what we could do is, let me just jump over here. Let's get to File Browser and say, okay. So let's say we're doing a MIDI file here. What we could do is, so a MIDI file itself has it's just MIDI notes. It could play back through an organ, a piano, a synthesizer, a trumpet. But we could assign it to particular instruments. So let's say I want to, like in my project, I could just choose to have it play back. So we'll see, I don't have, let me just create an instrument track here. So if I go to my VSTI, let's add a rack instrument. And Now I want it to play back through Hallian Sonic. We'll create. All right, so I'm just going to load up a sample. All right, so now we'll go back to, let's say, our media bay. So when we want to preview, we could choose our MIDI device, and I could just say, okay, now I just want to preview the MIDI file here. So we could just kind of come over. Not sure if these actually have data on them or not. But you would need to route it to like one of the instruments for it to play back. Let me just. And some of these might. Oh, let me see if I may have it. Mute it here. So now if we. So, but yeah, so here we could just choose what, like if you want it to be a piano sound or something like that you want to preview it. And say, okay, now when we come over here, so just a MIDI file. So, but it would need to be just kind of for some MIDI loops, which would be something that's in the project, and we go, okay, I like this particular MIDI event, then we could save it as a loop, and that stores the sound, the instrument, and the preset that's used with that. But a MIDI file, when we preview, you may have to just kind of go to the bottom here and choose what instrument it's being previewed through. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, so we see a question from Observation Audio. Just says, hi Greg, I'm mixing a live recording where I want to treat each song semi-separate. Is there a way to save the session without media, but all the settings and plugins, like for drums and bass? Okay. All right, so let's come over here. Let me just load up. All right, so let's say I'm kind of want to treat it like I'm just running everything through a console, and then everything kind of goes up, same settings for the next song. All right, so what I'm going to do is just select, let's say my tracks here. And I think this would all need to be audio. If we click into settings, we could say save selected channels. So we'll call this okay, so I'm going to reset all of my channels here. So let's just put them on Q-Link and we'll absolute. And okay, so let's say now I want to get back to my to where my mix was. I would just select the particular channels, and then we go to the settings, and then we could just say load selected channels. And if we go to desktop, I think we called it July 18th mix. All right, so if we look at the mix console, once I load this up, now the mix is recalled. So you could, in essence, save a preset. So you'll see it just in this little settings wheel, kind of in this the settings cogwheel, like the gear. So you could just come right over here, and it works in the upper, in the full screen mixer. So you want to select the channels, save selected channels, and then select the same channels in your next project that you want to carry over and load the selected channels. So let me know if that's what you want to do. All right, you see Jazz Dude was kind enough to put the link where people are sharing different remote scripts. All right, so we have Deep Stasis, or Stasis says, hi, just finally switched to Cubase 14 Pro coming from Studio One in Lancaster, California, or mostly do ambient style music. Well, welcome to the live stream. We hope that we could help you along and get you up to speed on your Cubase journey quicker. And it's wonderful for you to join us today on the live stream. Thanks for being a part of the community. We hope to see you on many more live streams. All right, so we see Bratman Studio just says, like that groove idea, I'll have to get into that. I've made my own quantized groove from guitar or bass tracks, but you showed some ways in the inspector I didn't know. So much to learn. So I'm still learning new stuff in Cubase as well, so don't feel bad. All right, so we see from Vicken, just says, sounds about right. Thank you, Greg. So you're welcome. And just out of curiosity, what part of Chicago are you in? I used to travel all throughout Chicago, visiting many guitar centers and Gand back in the day, and Sam Ash stores. It was a lot of fun. All right, wonderful to see Millard Brown, where he says it's hot and humid in Pennsylvania today. He's hoping that everyone is well and happy. So in DC area, we're about 10 degrees colder than yesterday, but it was up to feeling like 104 yesterday, so I mostly stayed in. All right, so we see a question. Is there any way to aim the chord track at more than one track besides monitored tracks? If I use monitored tracks, it also steps on any instrument track I try to record on. Thanks. So if you want, so let's see if we do maybe a MIDI track. Let's give it a try. We might be able to kind of fake it with doing a MIDI track through Sends. All right, so let me add a chord track here. All right, so let's say we have a chord track, and all right, so let's add some instruments. All right, so let's add retro log track. Okay, let's add another instrument track. We'll add one more. All right, so we have these 3 tracks here. So we have a synth and say pad shop. All right, now let's say if I add a MIDI track to this. All right, and we'll just call this layer. Okay, and we go to MIDI sends. So we see this on MIDI track. So I could say now we want to go out to Retrolog and Hallian Sonic and to Pad Shop. All right, and we're going to turn these 3 on. All right, so let's say if I just monitor on the layer track, if this will work. So these aren't monitored. So if we create a MIDI track and use that as kind of the layer, and go to the MIDI sends, we can now come over here and you want to set the output to the different instruments. We could layer 4 different instruments per MIDI track, and you could have multiple MIDI tracks that are where the track is record enabled or monitored and the actual tracks here are not. So let me know if that would work for you, Millard. All right, we see a question from Flyv. He says, my one question of the day is, what is more important during creation, to stay in time and in sync? I think as a musician, I remember my bass teacher, it was incredible teacher, one of the wisest men I've ever met, and his name is Sam Cross. Just brilliant teacher, brilliant person. And he would always really emphasize that rhythm was like the most important part. Like, you could fake the notes, a lot of times it's much easier to get by with wrong notes if the rhythm is right, especially if you're doing kind of like fast passages. So if you're doing like dun, 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 so you could kind of often, as long as the rhythm is very steady, it's a lot easier to get away with wrong notes with a steady rhythm than right notes with the rhythm that isn't steady, I would say. But it could depend on your parts. If you're playing like, string pads, the rhythm may not be as critical. Like if you're holding a note for 8 beats, a chord for 8 beats, and one of the notes is wrong and it's clashing with everything, then in that context, the notes would be probably more important. So it could really vary depending on the musical context. But I would err on the side of doing, being more rhythmically accurate. Having a good time will always make things easier. All right, so we see Vince will be watching back later today. So thanks for joining us on your father's birthday. All right. See Uno Memento and Brian are all saying hi to Sable. All right, we have Ciranoro just saying hi. So welcome to the live stream. Thanks for joining us, being part of the community today. All right, and this question is, says, what's the difference between delete, overlaps, mono, and poly? Sorry, I'm new. All right, so let's take a look at it. All right, so let me just put in some just. All right, now let's do some chords here. All right, so let's go ahead and make this a little larger so we can. All right, so we have like 3 quarter notes, we'll say 4 quarter notes here. And if we have these overlapping, so let's say this note is going to, let's say we have 8th notes. All right, so we can see that that note is still kind of underneath. So if we come over here, let's take a look. All right, so now when I move this note up in pitch, we can see the underlying note is there. If I move this note up or down, so let me just come over here. I think it's going to be under MIDI functions, the delete overlaps, mono. So now let's see. All right, so let's see when that is. Let me see if it's a checkbox thing. All right, so let's say. All right, so now we see that when we did the delete overlaps mono, that this particular note got truncated, and if we move this note, we can see that that note was truncated. And when we do this kind of polyphonically, so let's say I drag these over, and we'll drag these over, and we select all of the events. We'll get to MIDI functions, and now let's delete the overlaps polyphonically. So now if we move this, we can see that those notes were automatically kind of truncated over top so that the notes would sound. So it just allows you to work either on a monophonic source, like if you're doing something very specific for like a bass part, or you're doing chords, you could pick and choose between the two. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, so we have Angel Guilin, it says, hello there. I'm not able to use her, but I've seen that MIDI can duplicate mirror notes in the next bar. Can Cubase do that? And how? I've tried macros, but does work. All right. So let's say if I want to come here. All right, so let's say I have these notes. I think that we could duplicate, and if we go to MIDI here, we could choose to let's see if there's any that we could just mirror the notes like that. So if we have these particular notes here, so let's say I want to take this, duplicate, and mirror. So if we come here to the MIDI functions, you know, we could just come right over here and say mirror. So you could do just like that. And if you wanted to turn that into a macro, so that you don't have to do 2 steps if that's too much, if you're doing it very fast all the time, we'll just add a new macro. So we'll just now choose, and we'll add that command, and we'll just type in mirror. So we get to the keyboard shortcut, and now we can add that command. So now when I come over here and I run the macro, we can just automatically, so I want to take the selected notes and duplicate and mirror. So if we want to take this and now duplicate and mirror that, we could do that. So let me know if that's kind of what you want to do. There's also some other things you could do in the logical editor. All right, so we see Benny checking in from Mallorca. Hope you're doing well. I saw pictures of you swimming, or video of you swimming in your pool. Hope you're having a great time. All right. In a memento, wants people to whack the like button. See Dwight Cunningham just says thanks very much. You're welcome. Observation Audio just says awesome, thank you. Millard Brown just says, aha, thanks Greg, that's the hack I was looking for. That's probably with the layering of the chord track stuff. All right, Contemplate Music says, hello Cubase Fanatics, third live stream I managed to join. Chuffed to bits and happy over the moon. Thanks for joining us again, being part of the community. Jazz Dude shared a link for a macro to arrange loops into full projects. All right, so Sable just says, question, Greg, I bought the wrong Spectral Layers Pro upgrade 11 to 12. Learned I also have Spectral Layers Go 11. Thought it was Pro. I have Pro 9. Bought from 9 to 12, but need a refund for getting from 11 to 12 Pro. Haven't heard back from support. So if you want to send me an email with like your email address for the that you use for the Steinberg online shop, Sable, if you want to send it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I could probably send it over to our support and they could get back to you. They may have to send it to the online shop, but if you want to send that to me, I'll kind of try to expedite it along for you. Contemplate Music says, hello Greg, greetings from Derby, UK. UAD Luna just threw out a bunch of AI features in. Is Steinberg planning on following the same path for Cubase, Wavelab, etc., or your software remain pure? I think we like to actually, I don't think we're gonna, I can't really contemplate on future stuff or, but I think where we use AI, sorry, I had to sneeze. Where we use AI is for, stuff like spectral layers when we're doing kind of, AI learning functionalities for extracting voices. I haven't seen what Luna is doing with AI stuff. But, I would say, I think, generating a whole song in AI is, not very fun. It's not very satisfying. I think it's kind of novel at best, and there's all sorts of discussions on like I've seen one of the Cubase project managers kind of has had some discussions on LinkedIn, which I think are really good of and obviously there's the recent case of the band. It got like 1 million streams that was completely AI generated, and so I think the goal should be to because AI is learning from what's already existing, that we should create something new that, isn't already in an AI model or a database or learning. So I think, that, everyone could write, a very basic song. But I think, as we're working on our compositions, it used to be, okay, like how we would differentiate like a pro thing versus an amateur, or a demo versus a production. Some of those lines have been kind of smeared. So, but I think, the new thing is to try to, there's obviously a lot of AI stuff sounds very similar to me musically. So I think the goal is to do something creative that, something fresh and new. So I don't think I personally don't see Steinberg as like the next version is like, oh, you could automatically have it write a song and come up with parts for you. I think that's not very creative or engaging or kind of satisfying to use. So, but we'll see what, obviously there will be AI stuff that, comes in spectral layers. When we do chord tracks and generating harmonies, we could argue that that's AI. So it could also depend on your definition of AI. So. All right, so we see from Ergo Hog, so can we implement MIDI the way Reaper, Ableton, and Logic does? Love Cubase, but you are way behind times. Please, Greg, you're the only one that can help. Or Dom, Sagalis. Let me know what you think is behind the times. So I think some of the most prominent MIDI sequencers, orchestrators, composers kind of live and die by the MIDI in Cubase and can't do MIDI in many of the other programs that you list. So if there's a particular thing that you don't understand with the MIDI or you want to see different in the MIDI, just let me know, and you'll be happy to see if we get it where it makes sense, or if there's something you don't understand, or or if there's something we don't understand, just let us know. But just if you give more details, that would be helpful. All right. All right, Doughboy asks, hey Greg, my question today is a very simple one. Is there a shortcut or macro to duplicate MIDI notes, like say when I'm drawing in my drums in another DAW I was able to do with Control D, I believe? So if you want to just kind of duplicate like these MIDI notes here, I could just Command or Control D and duplicate the MIDI notes. If it's kind of, sometimes you may run into scenarios where if there's like a space, so let's say I wanted to duplicate, let's say we're in the middle of a measure like this. If I select the range, so like where we're not starting at the beginning or the end of the measure. So when we duplicate the MIDI notes will line up right after each other, just hitting Command or Control D. But if we wanted to duplicate that range of events, at this point, if we select the range tool in the MIDI editor, at this point we could just duplicate and still have the space at the beginning and at the end, so that it's kind of contextually, accurate within the context of the beats within the bars as well. But just Control or Command D should duplicate as well. All right, Daniel Solomon, welcome to the stream. Says hi and thank you. Trying to understand more two things. One, when exactly is it better to use relative grid? All right, so let's look at relative grid. Okay, so let's say I have a MIDI event that is over here. So let's say, but it's slightly ahead of the beat. So I'm going to take my snap off here. Okay. So we see that this doesn't start on the beat. And what I want to do is when I copy it, so I'm going to change it from grid. So right now, if I move this to the grid, it's going to snap directly to the grid. Now, if I want the same kind of proportionality of being earlier, that's when I would use grid relative. So now when I come over here and move it, we still have our grid set to bar, but it's still going to be earlier by that amount that it was earlier. So it keeps the relative position of this in relation to the grid. So again, it doesn't snap it to the grid. I want it to be relative to the grid. So now as I move the event, it's going to be timing where it's going to snap and still be earlier, but still snap to the grid value. All right, and question. Okay, so second question from Daniel is, on score, a lot of musical cues, one after the other, and a lot of markers. What is the best way to mix down without doing an overlap cues? All right. All right, so let's say if we had, let me just... All right, so I'm just going to add, let's say we have like, so we'll say Bach is composing for our film. All right, so I'm going to add a marker track. Okay, so let's say, you know, I have like maybe multiple cues laid out here, and I want to, so I'm going to hold down, let's say, I think it's my, all right, so let me just get my keyboard shortcut here. All right, so let's say, all right, so I'm going to hold down Command and Shift and say this is our first cue here. And we're going to say this is sunset on beach. And our next cue starts here. And okay, and we'll say shark scene. And I think we could even overlap those cues if we wanted to. And let's say now we're going to have lifeguard rescue. All right. So we have, so I just hold down Command or Control plus Shift and drag, and that will create cycle markers. Okay, so we have different cycle markers here. Now when I want to export, I would go to my File menu to export audio mixdown, and then we would choose export by cycle markers. And now what I could do is just say, okay, I want to, after the export, let's create audio tracks. And now I'll just come over here, we'll export the audio. And each one of this, each cue could be done based on its own cycle marker. So now we could have, we can see our cues are automatically, our mixdowns are automatically generated based on the cycle marker. So once you get to the export audio mixdown, just come right over here, go to cycle markers and check the cycle markers. And then you could export each of the cues just like that. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Daniel. All right, so we see comment from Contemplate Music, says, thank you, Greg, for your answer. AI sinking into every part of our life, and it drives me mad. I'm happy that the creative side of music will remain pure and true to the roots. I think it's musically, you know, like creatively satisfying to come up with something clever. And I think, you know, stuff, and I know I understand the feeling of, oh, I don't play this instrument, and I could have a guitar thing that plays it perfectly and it will take 10 seconds, but I think it's always better when you have like a real musician, you know, when you do that. And I think not only do we appreciate the kind of the journey of completing a project, the satisfaction of doing that as well, and it's, so I think there's a lot of, going through the process, I think is an important part of the creative process, is just having to do it and slug it out. And I think that effort will always be rewarded. All right, so we see from Doughboy, thank you, that's what I needed to learn. So the range tool, got it. All right, glad that did the trick for you. All right, and we see Doughboy just says, right, I'm just so used to doing stuff with my mouse and keyboard. So like your mouse and keyboard are always kind of right next to you. So it's a good thing to be used to. All right. Don't know if I mentioned this, but Val is on from Vienna, where it's hot and humid today. Sending greetings to everybody around the world. All right, so we see from Daniel Solomon says, thank you so much, great. Doughboy says, thank you for tips, really appreciate it. It's probably also to Jazz Dude. All right, so we see Sable Winter says, Greg, thanks. I'm sending the email to refund at and copying you as well. So yeah, let me know if you have any problems. All right, always wonderful to see Kerwin Young just popped on. Says, hey everyone, I hope everyone's enjoying the summer. I'm currently in Central Florida. Saying hi to Jazz Dude and Sable. Sable Winters says, Greg, you're right about the satisfaction of creating from scratch. Suno's lacking in features or user-friendly, but offered inspiration at best. So. All right, let me jump to a question that was mailed in. All right, so we had a question of how to remove the silent areas in an audio recording. So if we have an audio recording and then there's just gaps of nothing in between different sections, how can we remove that? Okay. All right, so let's say we have an audio file kind of along the lines of this, and we want to just get rid of the individual sections here. All right. So let's go ahead and I'll just make, let's see if I copy this as well, and we'll give it a big gap here. Okay, so we have our audio files like this, and we want to get rid of the gaps between. All right, so if we go to your audio menu, and at this point we go to advanced, and we will see detect silence. So I have those different sections selected here. We will come over and just choose process. All right, and we'll do this for the second event. And now what it will do is automatically kind of get rid of the silence where there was nothing going on, so that we could see the events automatically kind of carry over right there. Now, if we wanted to take these particular events and do like that silence could still be taking hard disk space. So if we want to come over and just have the sections of the audio that are being used, so we're not, if you're trying to clean up hard disk space, at that point what we could do is, if we go to your render in place and we go to render settings, we could just say, let's build these as separate events. So I'm going to take all of those events, render it as a separate event, and come right over, and if I don't have it, And now I could remove all of these files right here from the top. We could go to our media menu and remove unused media. And then that will get placed into our trash can. So if we come right over here, the long file with a bunch of silence is now placed in a trash can. And then we could empty trash and only have this space right there. So to get rid of gaps in the audio, all you'd have to do again is come over here, go to audio, go to advanced, and then detect silence. And you could set the threshold kind of as makes sense for your particular projects. All right, let me clear my throat real quick. All right, let's go back to see if we have more live questions. All right, so Rick France asks, hi Greg, I think I'm missing something. Is there a way to have the grid match the quantize settings? Seems a bit hit or miss for me. Can you remind me of the exact setting I need to do to keep it in sync with Q? Okay. Okay, so let's come over. All right, so when we do this, the grid can be, all right, so right now we have our grid set to bar, and as we kind of zoom in, we could see different grid divisions automatically show up. So if we have, let's say, our grid set to use quantize, so, one of the things that you could do that I generally like is the adapt to zoom. So I could see my grid settings here. Now, another thing that we could do if we have, let's say, if I want to adjust my grid settings, let's say I have, we'll put a signature bar in. So if we say, okay, let me just add a signature track. And let's say we're going to go to 7/4 here. Okay, so one of the things that we could do is if we go to the click pattern, so let's say I want like 2 + 5 for my click pattern. If we right click, we could use the metronome click pattern level for the grid line emphasis. So now we can see that the grid has automatically changed here to like 2 + 5, and we can see kind of this grid line. So if we went back, let's say to 4/4, and we put a signature event here, and if we go to edit this, let's say I want to have this be double time. So if we go to the click pattern, we could say, okay, I want 8 divisions in a bar, or let's say I want this to be like 6/8. So now we could have like 6 divisions per bar in our grid line as we kind of work. So so this way we could kind of change the grid based upon not necessarily the quantize. If we have this to use quantize, we could do that, but it may not make sense if you're kind of zoomed out here and then you have eighth notes selected, and at that point where it's like all you see is white grid lines. So, but you can do it. You might be able to accomplish what you want with using kind of the click patterns, and then again right click in here and just choose to use the metronome click pattern for the grid line emphasis. So let me know if that works for you, Rick. Sorry, just cleared my throat. All right, Ali Danesh asks, okay, his question is there any way to chop multiple whole note chords in the same event to 16th notes, and it could be done sorry, it says my chat field just jumped. I know it could be done with the scissor tool and Alt Option, but this only does one chord. I need multiple chords to be done. Okay, so I think we could do it with a like a macro. So let me just come over here. Okay. All right, so I'll just drag these down. All right, so we want to basically chop these as 16th notes. Okay, so, so what you can do is come over, and as you mentioned, we could select kind of like the chords here, and let's see if we select different chords. If we grab the Alt with our scissors tool, so we could cut everything within a chord. All right, so what we want to do is let's come over here. Let's create a macro. All right, so I want to, all right. All right, so I'm going to switch my quantize to 16th notes. Okay. So let's make a macro. Come over here, I think we could do it. Okay, so we're going to set the quantize to 16ths. Let's add the command. All right, and then we want to kind of nudge forward, which is command plus the plus. So we're going to nudge the cursor right to add that command. And split. All right, so let's see if I come here. Yep. All right, so if we just assign this, and you could just, if you have a controller, you could just hold the key down or the keyboard shortcut to trigger that, and that will now automatically split the notes into 16th notes. So again, so you want to set the quantize. You could set the quantize value to 16th notes, or you could use the existing quantize value. So if you didn't want to have to worry about it, then you want to say transport nudge cursor to the right, and that's also command plus the plus sign on the numeric keypad. You want to do edit split at cursor, and then transport nudge cursor right. So that's how you could do that. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, Smiling Sound Productions Amsterdam says, hi Greg, earlier this week I asked about unmixing piano and guitar in spectral layers. Turns out some checkboxes weren't enabled by default in the new version. You have to tick them manually. Okay, glad it was a 2 mouse clicks to happiness for you. Thanks for letting me know. I'll keep that in my mind for if that comes up again. All right, Anthony Clark just says, hi all. So thanks for joining us. Rick France just says, thanks Greg. All right, see Uno Memento is missing our Ice Cream Man, Michael Teams. All right, and since Michael is absent so far, Uno Memento is going to fix it with a pint of Olvie beer for everyone. All right, Gerald Ely says, click pattern for the grid line emphasis. That's my tip of the day so far. That's a good one to know. All right. Doughboy says he's also in Central Florida. So, all right. So we see Jazz Dude posting video with Lauren Balfe using Cubase. All right, so we see from Sable Winters says, I'm trying to understand VST Live 2. Is it like Ableton Live for performance? I could use this for seamless use with Cubase Pro 12 on Windows, or do I have to pay for it? So it's an extra program. And what VST Live 2, like a lot of times when we're doing live performance stuff, there's kind of different requirements and needs. So we'll just go ahead and open up VST Live 2. It's actually worked on by Charlie Steinberg, founder of Steinberg. All right, so when people are playing out live, there's a lot of different considerations. Cubase is going to be, primarily set up to be working as like for composing, editing, writing music, MIDI sequencing, notation, all that stuff. But when we're going out and playing live, there's kind of different requirements. So one of the things that you could have is, you could have a set list. And a set list can have a number of different songs. Now, each of the songs can have a part. And we could think of the part as being maybe like the verse and chorus of a particular project of a particular song. Now, when we load this up, let's say if we're doing performance tasks, we may have different layers, and we can think of layers as like the different keyboard instruments that we're performing. So, like, I was doing gigs with my friend, did one last August, my friend John Fischel, and he spent a lot of time and painstakingly a lot of effort to set up kind of, because we're doing a 3-piece band with backing tracks. And it seems really easy when you start off. You're like, oh, I'll just have some backing tracks and we'll play along and everyone could hear the click. But then we start to think of like, okay, how do we transition from this song to the next song? And, how do we, if you have a keyboard player who's playing live MIDI and they want to also have, different, when they get to the chorus, they want to have different instrument sounds in different VST instruments. And maybe when they go from the verse to the chorus, at that point, they have a string part that's holding. And maybe when you go to the next part, even though it's loading up a sound, we still need that string note to hold for 3 beats into the chorus from the verse. So we don't want to cut off the MIDI. We want to set up zones on our keyboard so that these particular ranges are playing the organ. This range up high is playing like strings, but 2 octaves lower than it's played. And brass is being played in the lower left-hand corner. So we could set up different zones on your MIDI keyboard. Now, the beauty of this is we could take a Cubase project and just simply import that directly into VST Live. So many people will choose to mix down like different stems so that you could have like all your guitars, backing tracks. We could also have what we call stacks, and stacks are going to be basically like live plugins that people play through. So if you wanted to have the guitar player go through the VST amp rack, you can come over and have live input through your different plugins. And then we could have our tracks. Now, as we work with tracks, now this isn't really intended to do editing. It's not really intended to, I wouldn't probably do a composition. You can do composition and stuff, but when we look at VST Live, we could also just come over and say, okay, I want to come over here and have 6 different video screens. I need to be able to, we see lots of people have teleprompters for lyrics. So we could just come over here and just say, okay, when we come up to our lyric track, we could just kind of play it. So you could have an iPad or your phone with a lyric track that goes along. Also, if you want it to, for the musicians to have chord track, so that they could have their entire chord tracks laid out for them. So they could have that on a personal iPad. We could also get into stuff like, okay, we need to control the light show. So we could come over here and do DMX lighting control. So, think about this if you're playing live and you wanted to just instantly kind of switch between songs, have the lyrics, have the chords, control, 6 output video streams to be able to control lighting, to be able to set up all the keyboards to switch sounds while you're playing back the project without any issues. That's what VST Live is intended to do. So you could think of it as, we have people doing like Broadway type shows with it. But, I wouldn't anticipate like, while you could write a song, it wouldn't be like the best tool that I would think of for kind of composing and sequencing. But taking your Cubase projects, you could just simply import and export those projects to and from. So you can take your Cubase project and say, I want these to play backing tracks. I want to play these instruments live, and I want to play, my guitar player wants to play through these plugins live. Let's say they have like a Line 6 Helix plugin. They could have all their changes automatically set. And then you could just kind of go out with a laptop and fire off your lyrics, the chords, the lights, and everything for kind of a typical concert production. And those are the things that you could do with VST Live. So it's a separate application. It's very reasonably priced for what it is. But it doesn't come with Cubase, but it interacts incredibly well with Cubase. So let me know if that makes sense for you, Sable. All right. Sable just says I see it on sale for $59. So yeah, it's a great deal. All right, see, Jazz Dude posted a video with Tom Hulkenberg, Junkie XL. I still have to get some of my Atari disc back from him sometime. All right, so we see Fly V says he's back a little bit to rewatch. Okay. Daniel Solomon says, one more question. You could ask as many as you want. No, not entirely Cubase issue. I'm experiencing a critical and recurring issue with Contact 8.5.1, latest version in Cubase, 14.03.2 on Windows. Says, while working, the crash is consistent across several sessions. It happens specifically when Contact VST3 is active in a project. Cubase's crash log indicates make file copy edit. So you see kind of, I could do some research on that after. So I think we have a lot of people that are running Contact. I don't run it as actively. I have a license. I don't personally use it that much. But I could take a look. If you want to email me after the live stream, I could kind of Google I would probably just Google the crash message that you wrote, but it's probably not going to be a Steinberg issue, would be my guess, but I'd be happy to kind of look further into it if you want to send me kind of a brain cramp email reminder to clubcubase@steinberg.de. I see Jazz Dude says he uses Contact 6 and 7 and 8 on a daily basis and has no issues, but I didn't update yet. All right. All right, and we see Glenn Morrissey's having kind of the same crash issue with Contact in 14.03.2. All right, so we see Daniel Solomon just says, thanks a lot for that, Greg. So yeah, I'll look into it and see if there's if I could find out any more information. So all right, we see Sable Winters has passed on a birthday greeting to Flyvy's dad. So very thoughtful of you, Sable. All right, let me jump back to another question that was mailed in. All right, this one's kind of been an interesting development in talking about AI stuff and corporate changes going on. Says, I have a question about file sharing words you use. You seem to propose WeTransfer these days. And of course, it's not absolutely needed to get files to you, but you mention it when talking about sending files. I've just watched this video on YouTube, and to sum it up, WeTransfer can use what anybody sends them for whatever that license agreement does not exist on other file sharing sites. My question is, can you be a little more open to suggest unnamed file sharing services instead of WeTransfer in the future? I have a dislike about WeTransfer now and would like not to hear you mention it. So I think it's, I know that they basically came out and said that they could, anything that you're sharing on their service, that it could be used to populate AI models, basically, that, the information, so if you upload a song, that they could use that as the basis for an AI type of, modeling technologies. So I think anytime that you are getting something free, there's always going to be kind of there's no free lunch. Someone has to pay for it somewhere. So while it kind of seems kind of like a freemium type of model, and while they're hoping to, for us to say, oh, it's such a great service, I'm going to pay for it. I did see that there was a clarification statement with this. So when you share files, and WeTransfer is kind of a very easy and convenient, like I need to send a Cubase project to someone service. Again, it's free for, there is a paid tier, obviously, but most people can use the free one quite well. There's other alternatives, Google Drive, Dropbox, which I don't think have the language, but I did see that WeTransfer had kind of set a kind of more of a clarification with their new end user license. Let me clear my throat. So that they have kind of, I read that they came out with a new clarification on exactly, and it doesn't seem like it's as nefarious, but I think they are a company that was acquired by a company recently, so there's always going to be changes when there's an acquisition. I've been the survivor of a couple of different acquisitions in my career, and there's always going to be changes, so we'll see. But if you're looking for kind of an alternative thing, Dropbox is always good. Google Drive I don't think does it. One other thing that you could do is maybe tell the person, put a extension on the file of like dot, instead of a .wav file, maybe put a .wa underscore, and then have the person on the other side just change the file name, rename it to from like a base.wav or base.wa underscore, have them rename it to base.wav. Something like that may get around that file from being automatically fed into an AI modeling machine. But to me, I've always thought it was funny when people would post their Facebook pictures of my throwback picture from 10 years ago, and that was, to me, obviously kind of like an AI data source modeling, kind of used as a nostalgia, under the guise of nostalgia. So I think there's always going to be a different, there's always, if you're getting something free, you're paying for it somehow, but maybe just change the name of the files as you share. So that could be a clever thing to do. But I'll try not to specifically mention one particular file sharing. All right. All right. All right, so we see Aldi and Lee. Thanks for joining. It says, hi, Greg. When would you prefer 48 kilohertz sample rate over 96K in an audio production? So I think 96K will sound better, but depending upon the music that you're doing, if you're doing a thrash metal type of project, you may not notice the differences in the subtle nuances between a 96K file and a 48K file. If you were doing like something kind of like an Alison Krauss squeaky clean Americana acoustic with lots of beautiful reverb tails and lots of subtlety, then 96K may work better for that particular scenario. But 96K, when I may switch from 96K to 48K, is if I was having to work the project in Dolby Atmos, you're kind of stuck at 48K for the most part. And if you're working for video projects, you might work at 48K because a lot of video algorithms won't play back a 96 kilohertz audio file. And also when you have scenarios when you just have too much going on, because when you have a project in 96K and you have a plugin, that plugin is dealing with potentially twice as much information. So running a project at 96K could require more audio performance than a 48K. So I think with contemporary computers, it's not as critical with performance. We could get a lot of great performance at 96K, but those are times when I may consider doing a project at 48K. And I was trying to remember, someone on the live streams wanted to know like what sample rate Zed was using. It's one of the attendees from India. I'm forgetting his name now. And then like the next time I spoke to Zed's team, they're like, oh, we do everything at 44.1, So I would say generally if your music doesn't sound good, it's not the sample rate's fault. All right. All right, so we see Daniel was just mentioning, it says try to get an answer on native instruments about to crash, but they're blaming Windows. Okay, that's not a good sign. Let me see, Jazz Dude's had some experiences with Contact 8. All right. So, hey, Greg, what do you think is the 10 most necessary key commands for every Cubaser should know and use? All right. So we talked about this kind of last time of being able to, Alt or Option plus the letter P will play just the selected file and loop it and automatically play. Let's see, if we have an event selected, I think moving the markers to the particular event with P is also a great one. If you have a numeric keypad, hitting 1 to go to the left locator and 2 to go to the right locator, and the period key to go to the beginning of the project. Those are good keyboard shortcuts to know. Undo and redo, those are ones you're going to be using all of the time. So command, so if I come here and I erase an event and I want to undo that, it's Control or Command plus the letter Z or Z. And if you hold down the Shift key, that will redo. So knowing those, zooming in and out, so G, H. And then if you hold down Shift G, Shift H, you zoom vertically. Just G and H, you'll zoom horizontally. Using stuff like, navigating between different regions. So let's say if I cut this particular region, so let's say if I come here and I now split this, using the left and right arrows to navigate like to the right, or to navigate down to select different tracks. And if you hold down Shift, you can select the different tracks while you're navigating. So I always like if I want to select all the events on a track, Shift plus double click will select all the events after the one you double clicked on. If you want to rename events, some of the modifier keys, if you come over here, so let's call this Bratman. So, learn the modifier keys. So now when I hold down Control, when I rename the event or rename the track, the events will carry the name. So if I come over here, we'll call it Velocity, hold down Control or Command, and then that will rename the particular events there. Navigating like the keyboard shortcuts at the top to get the tools, those are always good. So a couple of things in like a MIDI editor. Let's say if I come here and I have a chord, there's a lot of great modifier key usages as well. So let's say if I come here, I have a chord and I'm like, one of the notes is sticking out. All you have to do is hold down Command and Shift, and you could adjust the velocity of one note within the chord. So I think that's a cool shortcut to be able to adjust the velocity of a single note within a chord, so you're not kind of having to guesstimate. Other stuff that's handy, I think, within the key editor, if I have these particular notes selected, the arrow keys will move it up kind of chromatically. The Shift plus the arrow keys will move it down an octave or up an octave. So there's a lot of times where I may duplicate a part and, I want to double that part up an octave or down an octave. So there's a couple, it's probably more than 10, but, when in doubt, go, if I could cut all of these events, You know, like I say, okay, if I could cut these events one at a time, what if I hold down the Alter Option key and cut? And then I could just simply cut at the same interval over and over again. So lots of little stuff like that that can really kind of speed up your workflow. And I always say, like, when you come over here and you go to like a function, you say, oh, you know, I want to, you know, just come over to my transport, and okay, when I want to go to a function, you know, look at what the keyboard shortcut is. And if you find yourself going to a menu like, you know, 2 or 3 times in a row, you'll always be faster learning keyboard shortcuts. If you want to be like super fast on Cubase, is just, you know, teach yourself like 3 new keyboard shortcuts every week and work those into your workflow. You know, if you do that, and let's say in a month you've learned 12 new keyboard shortcuts, and in a year you've learned, let's say, 150, 144 keyboard shortcuts that you've worked in. So every time you do that, that will just kind of speed up your, you know, your workflow. Like the fastest person I've seen on Cubase is Stevie Wonder, who, you know, is blind because he's doing everything with keyboard shortcuts. So, you know, learn a couple every week and just incorporate those into your workflow, and then you'll just be working super fast. All right, just read through comments here. All right, so we see from Daniel Coppins, says Greg, an issue I was having and figured out eventually is when using third-party plugins sidechain, it would not work, and figured out that you have 8 lens on the sidechain track, it will not work. Yeah, so, you know, when you do a sidechain, so let's just, so, and it's probably with the sends, I assume. See if I have this still in my recent projects. No. All right, so let me just open up. All right, so when you're dealing with sidechains, by default, it will actually show up under when we, you know, it's going to route it through a send. So let's say if we come over here, we can show you a couple other ways if you're out of sends. All right, so when we come here, all right, so let's say if we have a scenario where we want to do side chaining, all right, so let's say I want to side chain the bass from the kick drum. I'm going to come over here, let's go to, let's say, the compressor plugin. We're going to activate the side chaining. And we do this, let's look at my kick, and I can see that I have no sends that are set up. And we're going to activate the side chain, and we're going to configure our side chain here. So we'll say, okay, let's make it this kick drum. And now we're going to do side chaining. And we can see that when we go to the kick drum, that this is basically set the is using a send. So you could use 8 sends, but if you needed to do, you know, another way, you could also just say, okay, I want to add a group track. So if you want to add a group track, okay, so we'll come over here, let's add a group track, and I'm not even going to route it from that particular track. So we'll say this is going to be our, we'll call it our side chain group. I'll stop shouting at everyone here. Sorry. Okay, now what I could do, another little trick that you could do is just come over here and you have direct outputs. So when I go to my kick track, I could just come over here and say, okay, I don't want anything going to my sends, but I could go to my direct outputs here and say, okay, I want it to go to my groups. So we'll say our sidechain group. And when we go to kind of our mixer, let's just get to the mixer here. So I guess we could just do it right here. So now from the direct outs, if you have run out of sends, just come over to let's go to the direct outputs, and you may have to go to the settings and turn on direct routing summing mode on. So we could take the kick, and what we want to do is just, I'll just make this just a little taller here. So. Yeah, I'll just hide my. So now we could just enable the sidechain through the group if you wanted to as well. And at that point, you could just say, okay, we want the sidechain input, to be coming from the group. So, but it will, but by default, when you set it up, it will use one of the sends. But you could use groups as well to kind of feed different sidechains. All right, so we see from Ali Dinesh, says, thanks, Greg, for helping me with the chopping MIDI logical editor. Logical editor always amazes me, but I feel like this case should be easier to select the chords you did first and Alt scissors click. So I think it, when you do the Alt scissors click, it just goes to the end of that particular note. So that, which is kind of understandable because you may not, do for the selected notes. But it's going to kind of split a single event as opposed to multiple events. But I think once you kind of, fire it off from a keyboard shortcut, or from a controller that, you won't notice, and, it'll be very fast to work with. We see from Audi and Lee says, thanks, it makes sense. All right, Contemplate Music says, regarding Contact, I had to drop AVX and BIOS down to nominal, and it fixed all my issues with crashing. So it's good to know. All right, so we have Roisersken Turkey says, how do I make music on Cubase? It's really just, if you want to start off with a very simple project, like if I was writing a song, I may come over and we could just say, okay, I want to do a new project. So let's say, okay, I want to start with drums. So I'll come over, let's go do a drum track. Let's do a pattern event. I'm going to load up a preset. So let's just say I like this preset. Then if I want to program a beat, I click on the editor tab. And so let's say, okay, I want to come over here. then we can say, okay, what do I want to work on hi-hats next? And then you could actually just click on Euclidean and let's put in some other parts, but I want these to be, let's say conga. I want these to be at 8th note triplets to give it kind of a different feel. So you could just kind of paint in different notes and just say, okay, I want to add in some and now let's say, okay, I want to play a bass part. I could open up a virtual instrument. You have different synthesizers you could use. So I'll just try Retrolog, and let's say, okay, I want to look for, you know, a bass sound. And now I could just so you could just kind of start putting stuff together, and when you want to record like your voice or a different instrument, add an audio track, and then determine which input your source is connected to, and then just hit record. So okay, reading through comments. All right, so we see Glee Innocenti says, I'm still on Cubase 10. The performance tempo correction of acoustic drums is a nightmare. Was that improved? So I'm not sure if it's tempo correction or if you're doing like different like quantizing of drums. So if I wanted to, so I'll show quantizing and a tempo correction. So let's come over here. All right, so let's say if what every drummer hates you doing is taking the, sorry, I'm just, it's coming over. Let's say we want to listen to just the drums with a click track. And we can hear that there's some timing irregularities. All right, so if we want to, so we placed all of our drum tracks into a folder. So if we wanted to quantize drums, we could place it into what we call group editing. And, you know, what we want to do is first I'll just come over and let's find the hit points for my drums. So I'll just say, okay, let's edit our hit points. So again, listening to it with a click. Like when there's a fill. So it was a little behind. That snare fill kind of sped up. So what I want to do is come over, let's go to our hit points. And as we do our hit point detection, so we'll just double click, we're in our hit points, we'll adjust kind of our threshold, and we want to basically exclude tracks that are bleeding through. So let's do it for my snare. And let's adjust kind of threshold again. Okay. And the hi-hat is pretty rhythmically significant. All right, so now I'm going to put these into group editing, and I will open up kind of the quantize panel here. And what I want to do is to set kind of the priority for my drums. Like say the kick is going to have maybe the highest priority, snare top, we'll give it, and let's say these will be our priorities. And that will automatically kind of place the markers on the drums. So at this point, we're going to create the slices across all of my different drums. Let's go ahead and choose to, we're going to say, okay, let's do, we'll set our value, our quantized value here to 16th notes. And then we could just kind of quantize the different drums. So as we work with that, and and now as we and we could also, if you wanted to do this instead of like based on slices, you could choose to do audio warping, which will kind of just simply stretch the different audio warps. So now we could, and I could hear those fills are just kind of dead on. So, and if you wanted to also just do like tempo correction, if, and this came in later versions of Cubase, if we just say, okay, you want to do phase coherent audio warp. So if you have like one, so we'll come over here to the audio warp and say, you could just come here to free warp and say, okay, like this one hit was out of time. You could now just come over here and just move like there's that one particular hit without affecting the others, and move multiple tracks simultaneously. So you could do stuff like that. Now it's added, I think, in 12. So there have been some changes with that. Let me know if that's what you kind of mean, or if I'm misunderstanding, let me know. All right. All right, wonderful to see Nick on. I was just thinking about you the other day, so we haven't seen you in a while. Just a quick hi, guys. Can't stay. He says his life's a mess, but he's been regularly whacking the like button. Hope you're all doing well. So you'll be in our thoughts, Nick, and we hope to see you on live streams or a Zoom meetup soon. Thanks for joining us today and saying hi. We miss your presence. All right. All right, Tim K says back from the back feet ride. Says sometimes I just have to put the scenery into motion for the peace of mind. Awesome questions, tips, and tricks today. All right. Balsa just says Destroyer's my new favorite plugin. Quadrafuzz for subtle, Destroyer for not so subtle, distortion. Trying to move away from external plugins. I'm finding some cool replacements inside of Cubase. Yeah, so don't underestimate the Cubase plugins. So there's lots of great tools that are available right there. All right, so we see Anthony Clark says, hi, Greg. Can you explain what is the plugin ASIO and the plugin manager and how to use them properly when enabling and disabling the ASIO for the individual plugins, etc.? So some plugins, may not react as well to ASIO because ASIO is kind of a hybrid buffer model where the currently active track is running like the track that's monitored or record enabled, or recording runs at a lower latency and the rest of the tracks run at kind of a multiple ratio of that. So like only the tracks that need kind of I think the term Steinberg uses is prefetch latency are running at the lower latency, so you get better performance overall. So there could be some plugins. I haven't really had the need to personally. I know I tend not to run a lot of, I tend to run a lot of stock plugins and other plugins, but if you need it, if you're running into an issue with a particular plugin, if you select it, and then if you open up the information tab, so if you go to the studio menu, to the VST plugin manager, and you click here that you could basically disable ASIO guard for particular plugins. So I would say that if you notice that a plugin is causing issues and maybe creating instability, maybe try to disable ASIO guard and see if that makes a difference. I haven't really personally had to do that, but I don't necessarily use a lot of older plugins. I try to keep up to date with plugins, and not a lot of kind of shareware, kind of freeware, brand new young company doing stuff that maybe doesn't have the experience of stuff. But if you do run into issues, that's one of the things that you could work on. All right. All right, Uno Memento says, hey, we're almost at 100 likes. Join the likers. Who's the 100th? All right, so we see Bratman Studio says, excellent key commands. By the way, would love to see Stevie work. I met him several times when working at Wonderland Studio. So, yeah, I haven't been in Wonderland in a while because I'm not traveling as much, but yeah, it's always lots of fun. I remember going into like a bathroom in the back, and you just see a clavinet sitting on the side, and I just, a good buddy of mine was kind of his technical assistant at the time. I'm like, is that the clavinet? And he's like, yep, that's the one. So it's kind of cool seeing that much history and seeing the Yamaha Dream Machine and his Moog modular that kind of electrocutes people and stuff. Okay, so we see from Val, says, is there a way to have your sends automatically activated after you selected them? I mean, it did it 15 years this way, but it'd be really nice. All right, so let's say we have audio. We'll just add a couple audio tracks here. Okay, so let's say we have no sends here, so I'm going to, let's say effect track to the sends, so we'll add a reverb, and we can see that those are, once we add the effect send, that they're automatically activated right there. So if we come here, so I'm going to select these 3 tracks. So we see that there's no send on the 3 tracks. So now that I select them here, we'll say let's add an effects channel to the selected track. So we got add track, add effects channel, add the reverb. So now you can see that these 3 tracks that we had selected are all now being sent out to the reverb. And I believe that there's a preference where we could set preferences or settings where we could say we want this particular reverb to go at a particular level. Yeah, so if we go to VST, we could have the default send level set to 0 dB, -12, or -6 dB, whatever you want. So try selecting the tracks and then adding the effects channel, and then it will automatically enable and populate the send for you. So let me know if that makes sense, Val. All right, great to see Tim Weinheimer on. And we see Kier Dixon just says, thanks, Jazz Dude. Thanks, Craig. Okay, and we see kind of a follow-up for this from Val. It says, well, I'm on this topic here. It says about my question, I have about 27 FXs, 27 FXs preloaded my template, also groups and side chains, but I have to manually activate every send after I put it up. So, maybe what you could also do is, so let's say if I added a different effects channel here, so let me just add an effect channel, and now I want to put a delay on. Okay, so let me add some more audio tracks. All right, so I go to my mix console, and let's just say I'm going to select, like all of these particular tracks, and I want to, so I'm going to hold down the shift key, and now I could just hold down kind of the alt or option key, and plus this shift. So let's come over here to my sends. So if we want, we could just come over here and just say, okay, I want my mod machine on all those tracks. It would just by enabling Q-Link, so I don't have to do it one by one. I could just come over here and say, okay, let's add another effect send. All right, so now if I want to change this from, all the tracks are selected, I want these all to go from mod machine to studio delay. Now they're all being routed. So, maybe if you use the, experiment with using the quick controls. May have just accidentally closed out. Let me accidentally quit. All right, so there we go. So, but just come over and, maybe just select your different tracks here and then say, okay, I want the mod machine to be the top send, and you could now activate and change your effect sends for all selected tracks. So let me know if that kind of makes sense for your scenario, Val. Okay, Ball says question. Says how to export kick, snare, hi-hat as separate tracks with their insert effects that are on the drum bus, but all three are routed. Confused when to use export audio versus render. So I think they'll both kind of, it's kind of two approaches probably to doing the same thing. So let's say we'll come over. All right, so let's do. Okay. Okay, so let's say we have this going on, and we want to, say, take our kicks here. All right, and I want these to go out of, we'll say, output 2, okay, and All right, and I want these to go out of output 3. And I want this snare to go out of output 4. All right, and let's make... All right, let's make this output 5. All right, so we're going to have our different outputs here. All right, so as we're playing... So now that we have these kind of going, I want to put different effects on. So let's say, okay, let's just come over and let's say as we're playing here. All right, so say, let's just do. All right, so say we'll put some destroyer on that. And let's put a delay on this. All right, and let's say we'll do. All right, so we'll put just a verb on this. All right, so now we have different effects all going. All right, so if the goal is to just kind of get the different files, so I'll just drag this. All right, so now that everything is kind of broken up, I would do, if I was going to do it on a project level, is I would just, if I want it in the project, I would use the render in place. But if I was delivering the project as stems with everything else, I would probably use the export audio mixdown. But if I wanted this to just, within the project, so I could treat these as audio events, I would probably just, at this point, choose to go to, render settings, and we'll just render with the complete signal path. And as we do this, I won't use a custom name. We'll choose render. And then, we could have it automatically done just like that. Or if we wanted to now do like an export audio mixdown, and we can say, okay, I want all of, we'll choose multiple, and I'll say, okay, now it's render. I would tend to do this more on like the final stage, and we'll say, okay, let's export our audio. I created an audio track, and now each of the different sounds could automatically be rendered with their particular effects. So you hear the different effects, the reverbs, etc. So either way will get you to the same, it's like scoring a touchdown. If you run the ball or throw the ball, you score a touchdown, either way. So it's just different approaches to getting to the end zone if you want. All right, so we see Craig Noble's on. Says, any idea why Cubase would be restarting automatically after I close a project? So after you close a project, so is Cubase closing? Is it starting, or because when we have a project open, so I'm not sure. So let's say if we have this project open, and we closed a project. So I come here, I closed a project. I could close the project without quitting Cubase. So make sure that, and we could have multiple projects open, but we could have one active at a time. So let me know if you're closing the project or you're closing Cubase. So it could be that maybe you're closing the project and you're not exiting or quitting the program, but you're just closing the project, and it can make another project become active if one is open in the background. So if you could specify that, Craig, it'd be helpful. Okay, so we see from Val, it says, no, I meant just going back to the reverb. It says, I meant I have a reverb in my template. Now I add a VSTI or audio and send them to the reverb. Then I always have to activate it manually. Okay, so I think there's a preference. So let's say if we have our effects here. All right, so we have these rendered in. So let's say I have on all my tracks here. So say we'll just take our audio tracks here, and I have, let's say, my studio delay here. So I'll just run my delay. Okay, so I have this ready to go. All right, and now when I go, there's a preference. I think this may be what you want, Val. Sorry for misunderstanding. So if we go to let's see if it's under plugins. Or maybe it's under VST. Okay, so there's a connect sends automatically for each newly created audio track. So if I now go to add a track here, so we see that I have in the mixer, the sends are kind of automatically, sorry about that. Okay, so now when I go to add an audio track here, those sends aren't automatically added. So when I enable this preference, so go to preferences or settings, and you'll say connect sends automatically for each newly created channel. Let's hit apply. Now I'm going to add new channel. So you see the sends are already there. So let's add a couple of audio tracks. And now that send is automatically populated for the newly created tracks. So again, just go to the settings under VST, connect sends automatically for each newly created channel. Try that. Sorry for misunderstanding. All right, so we see from Craig Noble, it just says, when I close the program, it restarts. So I'm not sure what would cause that unless, yeah, I've never seen that. I mean, I've seen sometimes where people have Cubase automatically start when their computer starts. Like, people have kind of a dedicated Cubase system. But I'm just trying to think. So when you close the program, it restarts. I'm not sure what would be triggering that. Maybe if anyone else has any idea. All right, so we see from Val, just says, thanks for trying, Greg, but I think it's just not possible because when I import tracks or loops, I can't have 27 effects channels connected. I want to choose the effects I send to, but then to manually activate. But I remember always was this way. I was just wondering if I oversaw something for 15 years. Yeah, so I think it's just kind of how it works. I mean, you have 8 different sends, but you could also send it to 8 different groups, and those groups could have different sends on them if you wanted to do it that way. But sometimes managing 27 effects at one time in any mix project could be complex. All right, let me go to the next question that was sent in. All right, so we had a question, how to set a fixed length on MIDI notes. For example, I want to make all notes in a MIDI part and make them all, I want to select all notes in the MIDI part and make them exactly 1/8 or 1/16 in length. Okay. Okay, so let me just revert this. All right, so let's say we have a series of notes here that are set to, I believe this is 16th notes here. All right, so if we wanted to take the rhythm of these, and let's say these notes are all slightly longer or shorter. And I want kind of a fixed length for these particular MIDI notes. So maybe it's like very rhythmically stable. So we could right click. Let's go to MIDI. And I think if we go to MIDI functions, that we could say, let's see if it's, or maybe if we kind of control click here, we go to functions. There's a fixed lengths command. So let me just see if it's under these MIDI functions. Okay, yeah, we just go to functions to fixed lengths, and I'm just going to use the quantize value that is set. So if I want these to be 16th notes, again, we could come here to MIDI functions and we'll say fixed lengths, and now all the notes will be exactly 16th note long. Let's say if I want them to be an 8th note triplet. So I could select these particular notes and come over. So again, MIDI to functions, and we'll say fixed lengths. Now, another approach could be where we could use the logical editor. So if we go to our logical editor, we could come over here. And we can say, okay, we want to transform notes, and we want to transform their length. And we'll say set to fixed value. And here we'll say, I want these to be exactly 1 beat long. So now when I come over here, we could make everything 1 beat long. If I wanted to make it, let's say, a half note, or we'll make it an 1/8 note here. So we could just say, so we could also do it directly in the logical editor to take notes and set them to fixed lengths as well. Okay, let's see if there's other questions sneaking in. Okay, so we see with Craig Noble, says it's only done it since the 12.5 update. So let me know if it's like 12.05.3, but I don't remember that, hearing it from other people. Let me know if there's anyone that's run into or Cubase is restarting and closing. If you have a video of it that you could maybe do on OBS, I'd be happy to take a look at it. All right, let's go to next question. Says, question, I am making trailers with Suno for taxi listings, but taxi won't accept anything that is done with AI. Is there any way I can put stems from Suno into Cubase, dissolve them to MIDI, and then resample them to AI so AI cannot be detected? They say there is a blueprint that can tell 99% of the time it is AI generated. So I guess that you could use spectral layers, and depending upon the parts, if you had to do something, I can remember, if you had to do something, I would maybe, if you had a hard time coming up with the parts and ideas, I would maybe, come up with the parts if you're using an AI tool, and then maybe use that as like perhaps a suggestion. And then you could just say, okay, I'm going to play along something to those lines. Okay, that's a pretty good guitar part that I wouldn't think of playing, and now I want to record that. There's lots of people that use like the automatic harmony generation in Cubase where they couldn't come up with the harmonies, and then they go, oh, that's a good harmony, let me sing that part, and then probably a real performance. I'm not sure what the AI algorithms are detecting, but it's probably the company that's generating the original sources, can figure out when you're using the original information, and there could be metadata in the file that's automatically being picked up as well. So I haven't had a lot of experience with that, but I would try to, maybe use what the Suno has generated and try to mimic it, both a real performance, and you could probably come up with something that's maybe even a little more exciting and better. All right, wonderful to see Pertti Komenin checking in from Finland. All right, Uno Mementos congratulating someone for the 100 likes. All right. All right, our next question was mailed in. Little help here with the logical editor. How can I accent the velocity of the first note in a bar? For example, accent staccato bars. I looked everywhere but could not find a right setting or script. Please help. Okay. All right, so let's say we have our velocity here. So let's say we have two different scenarios. So let's say here our velocities are all pretty steady in this phrase, and we could add to the velocity values. And let's say in this example, our velocity values are maxed. But in both cases, we want to have an accent on the very first beat of the bar. So let's say on this note and this note. So to accomplish this with the logical editor, we'll take two different approaches. So if we have like space at the beginning, so we can see our velocity indicated here. Let's go to our logical editor. And we'll remove these. So we're going to transform MIDI notes. And what we want to do is we're going to transform the velocity. All right, and first, so we don't want to do all MIDI notes. We want to do MIDI notes at the top here at the beginning of the measure. So we're going to say insert, and we're going to choose position, and we're going to say is inside bar range. Okay, and we see this little, we have 16 divisions here of a measure. So I'm going to just say, well, we'll just go to the second to the last. So this is measure, beat, 16th note division, and pulse within the 16th note division. So I'm going to go here and just say, okay, I want this to be we're going to put the third 0 at 1 here. Okay, so now we're only going to select MIDI notes in the first 16th note, so at the beginning of the bar. And we want to say the velocity, we're going to add, let's say, 30 values. Okay, so now we're going to take notes that fall in the first part of the bar and increase their velocity by 30. So we do that, we hit OK, and we can see that these two notes at the beginning of the bar have now been, their velocity is increased. Now let's take the opposite scenario where we want to basically, everything is at maximum velocity and we want to decrease notes that are outside, that are not on the top of the bar. So here we're going to transform notes that are outside of the bar range. Again, we'll do the same range. And you could also just kind of click right in there. Okay, and what we want to do to their velocity is to subtract, let's just say we want to subtract 30. Okay, so now any note that's not in the very top, like beat 1 of the measure, those notes will be subtracted by 30. So now, and we could just run that multiple times as well if you wanted to. So now we can see that, so whether you want to, so we could set the bar range and then choose whether we want to increase or decrease inside the bar range or outside of that rhythmic position within the bar range. Okay. All right, so we see Uno Momento says, and it doesn't end there. Just add more likes and the streams will get the continuation they deserve. All right. All right, reading through comments. All right. All right, so Roland Stuff says, hi Greg, after doing range level adjustments on a vocal track to remove breaths, etc., is there an easy way of sloping the beginning and end of each as there is with an audio event? Okay, so let's say if we are, so let's say if we want to do this and we see that this will do kind of a cut, kind of like that. So generally the range will, kind of just, take that particular point right there. And if we want to, I'll just make this larger. All right, so let's say we have this range selected here and we want to adjust. Let me just see if there's. So the range is going to be handled a bit differently. Let me just see. I thought there was maybe a way. All right, so let me just, I thought that there might have been, let me see, we have to adjust like. All right, so I think what you want to do, I thought there was a way of doing it, but let's say if we have, let's say if we bring like our range down in automation here, we have like these little nodes that we could go up with the automation. I thought it was maybe in the range tool as well, but it might be just kind of a straight linear adjustment. And we could, okay, so maybe if we come here, we just see if this is kind of what you want to do. So let's say if I take this, I'm going to hold down, looks like Command. Might not do it. I thought that there was a way of doing it within, let me just try a different section entirely. It hasn't been. Yeah, it might be just straight linearly down, as opposed to the automation, which could be kind of more dynamic, where you could do the tilts. I'll play around with it some more, like over the weekend, but I thought that there was a way to do it, but I could be mistaken. So I'll play around with that a little bit. Sorry about that. All right, wonderful to see Gareth on from Bilbao, Spain. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you're well. All right, so we see, can I use the vocoder but with a guitar instead of keyboard? All right, let's take a look. I mean, you can obviously put the vocoder on the guitar, but I'm not sure if you're going to do it as a carrier wave, so... this probably be... All right, so let's say if we want to just Okay, so let me know if you want to put like.
Do you recall?
See if we can. All right, so let's say if we come over, let's. All right, let's see if I come over, let's just add a quick instrument track. So I'm not sure if you want to use the guitar kind of as like the effect. Let's come over. And let's say if we send this out, let's see if we send this to, so I'm not sure if you want to use the guitar as kind of like the input for it, but here if we drag the guitar, generate the chords and have the chords play back from another instrument. And let's see if we. It's not going to be on there. All right, so I'm just going to add a MIDI track. So now we can use the MIDI to generate the chords. So the chords are actually generated from the guitar part, dragged to the chord track, and then added a MIDI track, dragged those chords as MIDI information, and set that as a sidechain input. So let me know if that's kind of along the lines that you want to do, or if you want to, do a different approach. But that way we're kind of using the basis of the chords from the guitar part. Right. So Anthony Clark just says, is there a way to set the RMS levels for the mixer channel? I can see that I can only go one track at a time using the control room, which is not practical at all. I worked with Pro Tools and needed that. So generally the RMS levels, you don't necessarily see them as, if I'm I could be mistaken, but I always was the impression that the RMS is kind of more of the quality of kind of the different tracks summed together and doesn't make as much sense. I always, and I could be mistaken on this, but I always thought that the RMS levels were kind of more, you'd want to see the results of like multiple tracks summed together as opposed to individual tracks. Okay, so we see Garrett says, hope all is well in Virginia. So it's just too hot in the last couple weeks, but we can't complain. All right, so we see Roland Stuff says, thanks for looking at the slopes with the range tool adjustment. It's no great problem doing it with the automation lane. I just wanted to avoid slicing up the vocal track to too many segments. That's all. All right, so we see Bratman Studios just says, I just purchased VST Live 2.2 on Spotted Tuesday after the demo for $99, but currently it's on sale for $59. Great deal. Congratulations, have fun with it. All right, I think we had another question. Let's take a look at. It's mailed in. All right, it says seem to be having an issue with Cubase 13 when I try to adjust the volume on certain events, audio tracks by clicking on the audio level line and dragging it up or down. Some tracks do not respond. I cannot figure out why. Most of them work just fine. Okay, so let's say if we have like a number of events here. All right, so I'm just going to put some space between these. All right, so generally when I get this question, it's more regarding, I'll just separate these quickly. Okay, so now when you come over here, we could set kind of the clip gain volume for each of the tracks kind of right here. So we could set. All right, now what happens if you can't see that? It could be that like two events have become glued together or something like that. So there's kind of two different types of objects that could be on a part. So we have an event is just a single audio, and if we glue two events together, now we see that we don't really have the clip gain volume. So if we want to come over here and adjust again, we could just say, okay, I could grab my clip gain here on my different tracks and adjust accordingly. But when I'm on this event, I don't see that. And that's because what we have to do is double click and we go into the part editor. So there's events and parts. And often when we glue two events together, it's not really like merging or writing a new audio file. What it's doing is basically creating a container of those two events. And that container is called a part. So when I double click on a part, we go from like the sample editor to the part editor. And as we look at our parts, now when I double click here, we could adjust the clips, the volume of each of the clips directly from the part editor, like so. But it's not done because these two, we can see, are kind of joined and kind of, tied together. So now, another way of kind of getting, if we wanted to do this on the project window level, is that we could select the particular events here, go to your audio menu, and you'll see a dissolve part. So now when I come over here, we say dissolve part, and now our event clip gain will become directly on a part. But when So we've taken the parts, transformed them back to events. But when they are apart, we don't see the clip gains. They're not visible because you'll need to access them in the part editor. So we can think of this as kind of like a way of doing kind of more audio assembly tasks, and people use it for comping parts. But if you now want to move to events that will always be kind of intrinsically tied and linked together and move contextually together, that's when they're glued, they turns the events into parts, and the clip gains and fade handles will be handled within the part editor itself as opposed to on the project window. All right. All right, so we see George checking in from Germany. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so we see just from Anthony Clark, says he changed all the mixer meters, show the electric part of each channel if you use better for the overall. We have that in Cubase. I'm talking about the electric stable part of each signal, not peak, so let's say if we're kind of playing along, just come up with a better project here. Let's go check out the meter appearance here. Yeah, so I think it's going to be, I don't think the RMS is going to be kind of more handled in the overall mixer meters. So, all right, so we see Lawrence Koch checking in from Rhode Island. Thanks for joining us. He's listening in from the car. All right, so we see Artist Knows Love is giving a thumbs up. We see Ben Tyerman just mentions he likes turtles. All right, we'll see if there's any other questions kind of sneak in. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone today. Give it a little bit of time, see if more questions. We have people joining late, coming off of work. All right, give it a little more time, see if more questions come in. And if you've learned a new tip or trick, make sure you hit the like button. And we'll give it just a little more time, see if more people. Yes, we missed Michael Teams with his virtual ice cream. It's hot for a lot of people in the United States, I know. Hope Michael's doing okay. All right. Let's see if there's any other questions. We'll give it another minute or so. See, Jazz Dude posted the link for VST Live trial version. All right, so we see from Glenn Morrissey, just says great stuff. Any idea why some contact instruments auto zero out the dynamics, essentially muting the instrument? So a lot of times it could be depending on the sample developers. So you see this a lot with like kind of string instruments. So so it could be that it's looking for like a MIDI CC to work with. So let's say if we go to Hallian Sonic and I'll load up like an orchestral instrument. All right, so let's say we want to do a horn. All right, so, and we put this in maybe a legato. So when I put it in, let's say, it sounds fine. Levels are controlled by velocity. But when we go to like a legato patch, it could be very soft. And what it could be is you may need to go to the instrument and use like, it could be like CC1 is for Iconica sketch here. So when I move my modulation wheel, you can see it on the left-hand side here that the dynamics will increase and decrease. So if you're playing a line, you need to do a crescendo. So if you're not hearing particular instruments, you may have to, you can kind of simulate the, the breathing and the dynamics that you get with a real instrument, because it's using kind of a MIDI CC message for the dynamic control as opposed to velocity. So if you have an instrument in a sampler that's not as, it's barely heard, it could be that you just need to move your modulation wheel. Some of the libraries will also default to an expression for the MIDI CC for that. So as you play, you try moving to CC1 or CC11 and see if that makes a difference with the dynamics. All right. All right, so we see from Isidore Elias, edited 4 bars of audio with Melodyne via ARA, saves now take more than a minute. That includes autosaves, which destroys workflow. This didn't happen when I used Melodyne as an insert. Any ideas? So it could be that if you're working with an ARA function, like if you come over here, once you have, so let's say if we come over here to like the track channel inspector, and we go to our extension, and we'll say, okay, we want to run this in spectral layers. And now when we do this, because you could be running, you're basically running 2 programs concurrently. So once you're kind of done with your ARA edits, one of the things that you could do is just come over here and where you see the extension for your Melodyne. Once you're done, try to say make track extensions permanent. And if you want to, just come over, and if you're not comfortable doing that, is duplicate your track version and, create a new audio file from this, and then you could always go back. But try to just, go to your, if you're done with the edits, try just coming over here and saying make track extension permanent and see if that kind of makes it more responsive for you. So all right. All right, so we have Pal Juma says, hey Greg, is it normal that I can run many plugins that are supposed to be up to date, like Flare, Choral, and many from Native Instruments or Isotope in Cubase Apple Silicon mode? Okay, so we see, is it normal that I could run many plugins that are supposed to be up to date, like Flare, Choral, and many from Native Instruments, Isotope, Cubase, Apple? So let me know. You should be able to run a number of plugins with Apple Silicon mode, but one of the things to be aware of, and just with how DAWs process audio, and this is for every DAW, like if you are running an instrument here with, let's say if we have like a Hallian Sonic SE, like a multi-timbral instrument, and we have like 8 instruments running in this one instance, that most plugins won't, most plugins are not able to allocate to different CPU cores the particular different instruments. So you may have one plugin that has 8 sounds loaded because it's convenient to navigate, but when you actually go to use this, that one plugin can only use one CPU core for all of the processing, as opposed to having multiple plugins that are running the different, like one sound. So, if you run 8 instances of a plugin with one sound, that will automatically take each instance of the plugin and allocate it to a different processing core, the CPU core. But if they are running 8 instruments all on one single instrument, most instruments won't do that. So, but inside of Hallian or Hallian Sonic, you could enable multi-core here, but most instruments don't allow you to do that. And if it does, check to see if your instrument. But that could be a reason why when you're working, it's like, oh, I just got this brand new computer, or why is it choking on something that's, seems not so demanding. It's because sometimes people will kill one CPU core, then the whole audio performance of the system gets decreased. All right. All right, so we see from Pal Jamal, says everything is in Rosetta mode, but Cubase is slower, and everything is fine in Rosetta mode. And it's slower, but it's slower. It says the problem is that Cubase blocks them, or I can't find them. So it could be that, when you're running in Apple Silicon natively, those, they have to be VST3 plugins. So, VST2 plugins won't run natively on Apple Silicon. So if your plugins aren't visible, make sure that you are, that the plugins you have are VST3. If you see them in Rosetta mode and not in Apple Silicon, then they're probably not VST3 plugins. And VST3 plugins have been out since 2008. So if you are a VST plugin, you could, in the United States and just about every state have a driver's license. So, so if you have a computer from 2024 and you're trying to run a plugin architecture from 2006, 2005, you'd probably need to update to a VST3 version if they're not available. So it's not that they're being blocked, just with Apple Silicon, the VST2 plugins don't work. So, all right, we'll see if there's more questions that sneak in. Give it a minute or two, and then if not, we'll see. Thanks for all the great questions. I hope that everyone's learned a new tip or trick. Okay, so we see from Powell, just says, I get that even if they're VST3 and up to date and compatible. Okay, thanks for now. I'll keep searching. So, sometimes, VST3 plugins, and sometimes there's a lot of isotope plugins that when Cubase will start up, if we go to the VST plugin manager, you may notice that you'll have a block list of plugins, and the block list will be plugins that are kind of deemed unstable for the system. So it does a quick kind of it does a quick quality assurance test on the plugins, and it may block plugins that are can cause system instabilities. So look in the block list. Often if you have a plugin that's in the block list, you can physically remove it from the block list, but it's being blocked for particular reasons. And and some companies, like some isotope plugins, kind of fall into the category where they get blocked by default because they're kind of failing quality assurance test with that. So you could look there and see if the plugins are showing up, and make sure that you do have the VST3 versions of the plugins. All right. So we see Anthony Clark just says, thanks, Greg. And we see from the Artist Knows Love says, thank you for all you do, Greg. Take care, everyone, please. All right. We'll give it another minute, see if there's other questions. Hope that everyone's having a great summer for those of us that are, and it's not too hot for those of us in the northern hemisphere. Let's see if there's other quick questions that pop in. Okay, so we see from Pal says, okay, thanks, Greg. I'll try those things. Val's just wishing everyone a nice weekend. All right, and we will be back on Tuesday of next week doing our next live stream. So if you're new to the live streams, we do them on Tuesdays and Fridays starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. See if there's, give it another 30 seconds or so, see if there's more questions, and that will wrap up. All right, looks like let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, and if you want to send questions in advance, you can send it to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, looks like we are out of questions. I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions, and look forward to seeing everyone back on next live streams. And you see Gerald's going to go over the VST Live demo. All right. Appreciate all the great questions, and it's always wonderful to be part of such a wonderful community. I appreciate everyone on the live streams, and it's just a joy to be able to help people with their Cubase and other Steinberg products. We'll be back on Tuesday and Friday of next week, and starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. I want everyone to stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you back on Tuesday. Goodbye.